I was 18 when I thought I knew everything about love. Or maybe I just wanted to believe I did. I'd graduated, barely holding on to a sense of direction, and he was 26. Older, calmer, confident in the way that older people often are around someone who still looks up to them. At the time, I thought that difference made him wise. Looking back, I see it made me vulnerable. He wasn't a bad person, at least not at first glance. He was charming, in a lazy sort of way, someone who could talk his way into your comfort, but never lift a finger to hold it there. He didn't have much going for him, but when you're young and naive, you mistake someone's need for your care as love. And that's what I did. I convinced myself that being patient, understanding, and nurturing made me strong. I didn't realize it was slowly making me small. When my sister called needing help, I didn't hesitate. She had 2 kids and some medical issues to deal with, and I felt responsible, like I always did. I packed a bag for a 2-week trip out of state and told him I'd check in every night. I figured he'd be fine. He was a grown man, after all. 26 years old. Old enough to know how to feed himself, I thought. The first few days were quiet. I'd text him, he'd reply late, and the conversation would drift off into nothing. It didn't bother me much. I was busy with my sister's kids, making dinners, cleaning up messes, driving to appointments. There wasn't much space in my head to worry about a man who should have been able to handle his own life for 2 weeks. Then on the 4th night, he called me. His tone was sharp, impatient, like something had personally offended him. I asked if he was okay, and he sighed heavily before saying, "I'm hungry." I thought it was a joke. Maybe he was craving takeout and wanted me to guess what he should order. But then he said it again, this time slower, as if it was my fault he hadn't eaten. "I'm hungry, and I don't know what to make." It was such a ridiculous thing to hear that I laughed without meaning to. I told him to make something simple. Instant mashed potatoes, canned green beans, those pre-cooked chicken breasts you can just microwave. The kind of meal that takes maybe 5 minutes of effort, if that. He paused for a second and then asked, completely serious, "How do you make mashed potatoes?" For a moment, I thought he was teasing me. I even smiled to myself, waiting for the punchline. But the silence that followed was real, heavy, uncertain, like he was genuinely waiting for an answer. So I told him the truth, plain and easy. It's on the box. You just boil some water and stir it in. There was another pause, and then he said something that made my stomach twist. Not in fear exactly, but in that quiet, disappointed way you feel when someone shows you exactly who they are. "What do you think I am, some kind of chemist?" I didn't know how to respond to that. It was boiling water, not a science experiment, just water and powder. But he sounded angry, not just frustrated, but genuinely insulted that I'd suggested something that required even the smallest effort. I said, "It's literally just boiling water on the stove." And I remember him scoffing, like I just suggested he climb a mountain. Then he said, "Whatever, I'm not doing that. It's way too fucking hard." And then he hung up. I sat there in my sister's dimly lit living room, holding the phone like it was a piece of bad news. Her kids were asleep in the next room, the TV was on low volume, and I remember just staring at the phone screen, trying to process what had just happened. It wasn't scary. It wasn't even dramatic. It was just sad. Like watching something you once thought was strong fall apart with a single sentence. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. About how someone could be 26 years old and not know how to boil water. About how that same person could make me, an 18-year-old, feel like I was the one doing something wrong. I thought about the way he'd said too fucking hard, like he wasn't just talking about food. Like maybe, to him, everything was too hard. I started noticing that thought replaying in my head, over and over. The way he always complained about doing anything that took effort. The way he'd say, "You're better at that than me," as a way to avoid responsibility. And the way I used to think it was sweet that he needed me so much. I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of me growing up. Not in the fun, carefree way people talk about, but in the kind of way that feels like a cold realization spreading through your chest. The kind where you realize love doesn't mean fixing someone. It doesn't mean shrinking yourself so someone else can stay comfortable. But I didn't leave him. Not yet. I stayed for another 2 years. I told myself that maybe he'd change, maybe he just had a bad day, Maybe I was overreacting, because that's what you do when you're young and think love is supposed to be patient no matter how much it costs you. And even though it wasn't scary in the traditional sense, there was something quietly terrifying about watching someone so incapable of simple independence and realizing that I was starting to become like him, slowly losing my own. When I got back from that trip, nothing felt the same. I didn't notice it at first. You never do. It's like walking back into a house you used to live in and realizing it somehow shrunk while you were gone. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel right anymore. He didn't meet me at the door. I had to let myself in, carry my own bags, and find him sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone like I hadn't been gone for 2 weeks. There were takeout boxes stacked by the sink, empty soda bottles on the table, and the faint smell of something sour in the air. I don't even think he looked up when I said I was home. It's strange how quickly love can turn from warmth into something that just sits heavy in your chest. I tried to smile, to ask how he'd been, but he just shrugged and mumbled something about the internet being slow all week. No, I missed you. No, how was your sister? Nothing. I went to the kitchen, cleaned up the mess without saying a word. There was a kind of silence that hung over that apartment that night. The kind that made you feel like even the walls were tired of listening. I kept thinking about that phone call, about the mashed potatoes and the water, and how angry he'd sounded. It replayed in my head every time I washed a dish or folded his clothes. It wasn't just about food anymore. It was about what it meant. Over the next few months, the pattern became impossible to ignore. He'd call me at work to ask how to do laundry, how to reheat something, how to fix the Wi-Fi. Simple things that anyone could figure out, but he wanted me to walk him through every step. I started realizing he didn't really want help. He wanted dependency. Mine, his, or both. I'm still not sure. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking about what kind of person I was becoming. I'd hear my own voice explaining, "Just read the box," and remember how defensive he got. It was like living with someone who resented you for being capable. I used to find it endearing when he'd say, "I'd be lost without you." But after that trip, every time he said it, it sounded more like a warning than affection. There was one night that sealed it for me, the night I realized just how deep my denial had gone. It was a stormy evening, the kind where the power flickers and everything feels smaller, quieter. I was on the couch, reading, when he came in holding a pack of microwavable rice. He looked frustrated, holding it out to me like it was a math problem. "How do I make this?" he asked. I told him to read the back of the packet. His eyes skimmed it for 2 seconds before he said, "Yeah, no, this is too complicated." Something in me broke a little. I asked what part was complicated. He said, "It says to tear the corner and microwave for 2 minutes. That's too much." I just stared at him. The microwave was right there, 2 feet away. I told him he could handle it, and he snapped. "Why do you always talk to me like I'm stupid?" The worst part? I apologized. I actually apologized, because I'd spent so long cushioning his ego that it had become second nature. I said sorry, made the rice for him, and sat back down like nothing happened. But inside, something shifted. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to him snore, and I realized how much smaller I'd become. Every time I helped him with something simple, a part of me dimmed. Every time I avoided confrontation to keep the peace, I erased a little more of myself. It wasn't love anymore. It was maintenance. The next morning, I watched him pour cereal into a bowl and still managed to spill half of it on the counter. I thought about how I was 18 when we met, and how I'd spent the past 2 years mothering a man who couldn't boil water. And the scary part wasn't that he couldn't do it. It was that he didn't want to. I started planning my way out quietly. Not out of fear he'd hurt me, but because I was afraid I'd keep convincing myself to stay. That's a different kind of danger. The one where you look at someone and realize they'll never grow, and if you don't leave, you won't either. When I finally ended it, it was almost anticlimactic. He didn't fight it. He didn't beg. He just looked at me and said, "So who's gonna make me dinner now?" And I swear, that moment told me everything I needed to know. After I left, I went no contact. I blocked him on everything. I remember sitting in my car outside his apartment complex, engine running, hands shaking. Not because I was scared of him, but because I was scared of what I'd allowed myself to tolerate. It took me a long time to stop blaming myself for staying. I used to think, how could I have been so stupid? But that's not fair. I was young. I thought love meant giving everything, even when it wasn't returned. And people like him, they thrive on that. They mistake your patience for permanence. Now, years later, when I tell this story, I don't tell it because it's funny or sad. I tell it because it's a quiet kind of nightmare that too many people live through. The kind that doesn't start with screams, but with slow, subtle exhaustion. The kind where you wake up one day and realize you've been living in someone else's comfort zone at the expense of your own sanity. So yeah, I was 18. I thought being with a 26-year-old made me mature. I thought taking care of someone meant I was strong. But real strength is walking away the moment you realize someone's not even trying to meet you halfway. And maybe the real horror isn't the moment you see who they are. It's the moment you finally see who you've become while trying to love them. If you're listening to this and you've ever been in a situation like mine, where love started feeling more like babysitting, where care turned into exhaustion, I want you to remember something. You don't have to stay. You don't have to keep teaching someone to boil water while you're burning out trying to keep them fed. What would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed, hoping they'd change, or left the first time they called boiling water too hard? Let me know in the comments below. And if you've ever had an experience like this, where you realize someone's incompetence wasn't funny, but a red flag, share your story. It might help someone who's still convincing themselves that love means patience at any cost. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to support the channel, hit that like button, and subscribe for more real-life stories that'll make you think twice about the people you trust. This was my story, one I didn't realize was a warning until it was already too late.